This is our fireside chat, so hopefully you feel nice and cozy now, as we do. So Teri and I actually met back when you were CIO of the state of California, and one thing when we get together and talk, what's clear is whether you're the CIO for a Global 100 company or you're the CIO in the government space, the challenges and the pressures and the demands from a technology perspective are pretty much the same. So we have a pretty common environment that we live in. And obviously, just to give some context, at Intel, the way our organization is, where we're organized, we have 6,400 IT employees at Intel and another 3,000 contractors. So we are a global, centralized IT organization. And I know compared to Teri's number, 6,400 doesn't sound like a lot, but for a Global 100 company, it's a pretty good-sized IT organization. And my budget has been flat for the past 6 years. And expectation with next year looking as it is, that flat could end up going down. So, you know, the demands we all have is, as the demands on IT continue to grow, we grow our overall compute capacity inside of Intel. We grow at 45% every single year, very predictably, thanks to Moore's Law. We grow our storage capacity 35% every year, and we grow our network capacity 35% every year. We also have more and more devices inside of our enterprise. 3 years ago, it was 0.7 devices per employee, because we have a lot of factory workers. Now we're at 1.5 devices per employee, and that continues to rise. And the business groups demand more and more. So we have this ever-increasing level of demand on IT within a flat budget. So we all kind of share this world. And so for us, that then drives the focus on how do we reduce the amount of spend in keeping the existing infrastructure and solutions and capabilities running. So I spend far too much of my budget. I have a $1.4 billion budget, which again is nothing compared to Teri, but of my $1.4 billion budget, I was spending 84% of that on existing infrastructure and existing capabilities. And I know, you know, on the government side, you have the same thing. We have this large legacy of old infrastructure, and fundamentally, we've got to figure out how to run that existing capability more efficiently. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're doing all the same things: data center consolidation, application end-of-lifing, virtualizing the environment, and now we've launched our own private cloud.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
so it's a big
Well, you know, one of the things, Diane, that's always been really interesting, and one of the things that I've always done is to really use Diane as a good sounding board, right? Diane, from the very early days, because when you're in government, there's a certain set of structures and a certain culture and challenges. And I think, you know, certainly in California and, you know, certainly a carryover, but at a 10-time scale at DOD, you know, we have our, you know, sort of chimneys of excellence, and everyone's very used to operating in their world. And even more so at DOD, we're so heavily distributed. I mean, it isn't even within the silos. The spend is actually distributed through the organization. And, you know, we were having the conversation about, you know, do I really know how much we spend in total? And the answer being no. You know, we buy a lot of it, as I love to say, and call it pencils, you know, whatever it takes, we can buy things that way. But the great thing I think about us having conversations is that there's a lot of things where you maybe don't have all of the same cultural constraints, and so the way that you're attacking things like virtualization, you know, like data center, and then of course, you know, the sort of ubiquitous cloud phrase, it's a good opportunity, I think, for me to understand kind of the art of the possible rather than getting kind of bogged down in the organizational issues. And sometimes it's important when you're in government to be able to do that, because the organizational issues can, you know, really kind of get to you. So that's why I was really and have been very interested in, and the other thing is, I think that's interesting from my perspective about Intel, is that number one, it's easier to kind of have good open conversation because, you know, we don't buy stuff directly from you. That's helpful. Right. And, you know, so we can get kind of advice and counsel in a different way than if I were to go to folks that, you know, we buy large stuff from, and there's a lot of implications there. But the two areas that I've always been really fascinated, and you know very well that I've kind of followed what you've done. And one is, sort of what you've been doing as it relates to virtualization, your data centers, if you will, creation of your own cloud.
Yeah.
And then the other one is, if you recall, one of the things that I said in California, and I'm saying even more so now, when we talk about the integration of the smartphones and the mobile devices and so on, is that I always check in with you and a couple of the other Silicon Valley CIOs, and I figure if you figured it out, maybe I can use that knowledge going forward. And I know that you've done a lot of work in that way. I mean, the statistics you quoted on devices, and the way that you're thinking about it, I found to be just very, very helpful.
Yeah, so first on cloud, because cloud is an interesting topic. It is such a buzzword. People do throw it out, and you always wonder if we're even talking about the same thing. For us, to your point about silos, so I will start by saying, even inside of Intel, the IT organization is very deeply tenured. We have people that have been doing the same job for 20 years. I mean, I think there is something about IT professionals. They're IT professionals, and they love what they do, and they want to just keep doing it the way they've been doing it. So to try to get even our organization to change and to adopt new practices, you really do have to up-level the whole conversation to the value delivered back to the business groups, or the value delivered back to your users or your employees. And then it ripples down into, yes, I do realize that means change for you. It does mean your data center goes away, or it does mean you're no longer the server guy, you need to be the virtualization guy. And it does get at some point, to that ripple, it gets very personal, and it is the hard conversation. But we try to start with the overarching, what value are we going to deliver? So we did a complete inventory of our data centers. I know you guys have done that too, and I got out of the conversation of how many square feet is a data center, and I just said if it's a room and it's got infrastructure.
I've had that conversation.
Oh, yeah. So if it's a room and it has infrastructure and somebody's responsible for securing and managing it, it's a data center. So just use that as the baseline and then count them up, and then rate them based on performance, efficiency, redundancy, and overall total cost of ownership of the data center. And if it doesn't meet the bar, then we're going to shut it down. So we were at 147 data centers. We're now at 91. We've got clear path to 59. We do believe we need 59 data centers around the world to serve Intel's business. But so we've got this very clear metric-driven process that says this is why this data center remains, and this is why this data center is going to go away. Then we went through the process of refreshing our server environment. So we have again, very metric-driven total cost of ownership model that says if we have a server in our data center that's more than 4 years old, we're going to spend more on OpEx than we will on CapEx to replace it. So when a server's 4 years old, we replace them at a 15-to-1 ratio. So you can take out 15 old servers, put in one for the same compute capacity. So at a 15-to-1 ratio, your footprint is shrinking pretty dramatically. We've gone from a peak of 100,000 servers in production. We're now at 75,000, delivering 4.5 times the compute capacity. So I mean, that's the magic of technology, right? So as you then refresh, you reduce your footprint, so it becomes obvious you don't need all these data centers. Once you've got that done, then we started virtualizing, and we had to get over the hurdle of, not my app surely can't be virtualized. So we've gotten agreement on what are the criteria by which you don't have to virtualize your app, and it's basically regulatory, some of the high security data repositories, very, very small handful of applications that will not be virtualized, at least not with today's technology. Everything else gets virtualized, and then once you have that virtualized environment, it's, the next step. I was going to say easy. It's not easy, but it's the next step is to build the automation layer on top of it to create a cloud. And we've gone down the path of a private cloud, as most of my peers have, because we've got the scale, right? We've got this large footprint. We've got this large base. It doesn't make sense for us to go to a public cloud and pay that service. I mean, we obviously would pay for that, versus taking our own existing infrastructure and turning that into an automated, managed environment. So we have 13 data centers around the world that operate as one single cloud. So, on-demand deployment, it's infrastructure as a service right now. We're going to platform as a service and software as a service. But, on-demand deployment in minutes of a virtual machine to land your application, a process that used to take us 90 days. So the clear value proposition back to the business is we can deploy a solution now within minutes instead of months. So keeping the organization very clear on our whole purpose is to deliver value, how are we delivering that value? But it's been the process. It's been 2.5 years of cranking through that whole process of refresh, virtualization, and then to private cloud. So, but the return is clear. I mean, that's why everybody talks about the cloud, because the value proposition is clear.
Yeah. You know, I think always the other thing, Diane, that's been really interesting as I listened to you, talk through this, and we've talked through a number of these technical issues. For those of you that aren't aware, Diane didn't start out as a CIO, right? I mean, Diane's background is in marketing, I believe.
No, I'm
right?
engineering.
And one of the conversations we had was, she said, "How did I get in this CIO thing, and how did that start?" But I think that one of the things that I've been really impressed with is that you had a relationship kind of with your senior management. I mean, Craig Barrett was there initially, and then Paul Ottolini, and the engagement, I think, that you've had at a very senior management level and coming in from someplace different from IT. I don't know, I think that that's a conversation and something that we in government struggle with, which is, getting a seat at the table, making sure that we've got senior people listening to us, sort of that perception of being an equal at the table. I mean, maybe you could talk a little bit about how that works, and because I know you've said to me, well, if I need Paul for this, then that's something where, wow, that's something that we all sort of aspire to be able to, have that ready access into the front office.
Well, I do. So I have been at Intel for 26 years, so my whole career. I joined as an electrical engineer, silicon engineer, and my last job prior to this was general manager of the server group. So I ran our Xeon and Itanium server organization. And so I absolutely agree with you. There has to be a level of partnership and a level of trust between the IT organization and the groups you're serving. I think, through the past 10, 15, 20 years, a lot of skepticism is built around, what can you really count on IT to do? There's been far too many multi-year programs that never deliver. I mean, we all know
a few of those myself.
We all know the horror stories. Yeah, and so I do feel like I'm lucky in that I'm CIO now, where my peers are people I've worked with for 20 years, and my boss is someone that I've worked with for 26 years. I mean, Paul's always been, my boss or my boss's boss. And he has a strong appreciation for what technology can do in driving employee productivity, or launching new business capabilities, or driving cost out of the environment, right? So anytime you automate an environment, you're going to drive fundamental cost out, whether it's people cost or quality improvements or whatever it may be. So I do feel that I'm lucky in that regard. In joining IT, it took me a while to get the IT organization to recognize that partnership between them and the groups that they're supporting is critical. You can't push an IT solution on anyone, right? They will decide whether they want to adopt your IT solution, and so you have to have that level of partnership. When our business groups are off developing their next product or marketing launch or sales event, IT has to be there with them, developing the IT strategy in support of it, because they fundamentally can't do anything today without IT. I mean, everything is so dependent upon technology. So that partnership is incredibly important, I agree.
Well, and I think having that senior level involvement, I think, as you've described to me, if there's a discussion going on about IT and you're not there, the first question is, where's IT? How are they supporting what we're trying to do? And I think that's a huge step, and one that we're still challenged with and struggling with, and trying to make sure that we get that seat at the table.
Well, I even see just over the last, even just 2 years, I've watched my peers, the head of marketing, the head of products, the head of sales, I've watched them recognize how incredibly dependent they are on IT. We used to be this thing that kept the networks up and, gave me a PC every 4 years, whatever, right? I mean, and now they realize there's this incredible dependency between what they're trying to achieve and the capabilities of IT. So as they recognize it, they actually want to be my partner. They want to be my friend, right? So there's actually pull from the business groups as they recognize that the expertise resides in IT, the technology expertise resides in IT, and they need to tap into that if they're going to be successful, right? We had talked, though, about security. You had asked about the bring your own devices. I was to hit on that briefly. So after one too many emails from Intel employees and our CEO about how come I can't bring my iPad to work, how come I can't bring my iPhone to work.
That resonates with me. I understand that one. Yeah.
So last January of 2010, we told employees, if you want to bring your personal device to work, you can. we became incredibly popular overnight. The IT organization, just our popularity level skyrocketed in that one announcement. So we now have more iPhones or Android phones or iPads in the environment than we do corporate-owned phones and tablets. So the employee base has definitely taken this up on the offer. The struggle is, well, so first we allowed the devices in, but it was basically just contact, calendar, and email. And even then, depending on the security level of the device, we would, for instance, strip off attachments on the email to try to reduce the security risk. But obviously the employees want more. They don't just want contact, calendar, email. They expect, every application they can access from their PC. How come they can't have it on their phone? And the issue, of course, is security. So it gets us right to the topic that everything these days comes right back to security. So we've launched a new security architecture inside of Intel. It's just in pilot phase now. We're rolling it out across the world. But basically moving us away from this binary trust model of, you're inside the firewall and I know your corporate device, therefore you're trusted, so you're either trusted or not. So moving away from that binary trust model to a granular level of trust. So what we do is we assess who you are, so what rights you have, what device you're carrying, is it an Android or is it a BlackBerry, how secure is that device, and then where you are. So are you inside the corporation, are you inside the firewall, are you outside, are you in China versus the US? And based on those parameters, we set a security level dynamically for you, and the gateway then uses that security level to give you access or not give you access to information based on how secure your environment is. And it's dynamic, so if you're standing inside of Intel's building and you've got one security level, when you exit the building, we detect that you're now outside of the corporate perimeters and we drop your security level and you instantly no longer have access to whatever it was you were viewing. So rather than tell employees, don't bring that device, this one's secure, that one's not secure, we feel like we've got to tackle it from the back end and just set up a whole new way of delivering content to the device based on those three attributes of where, what device, and what content.
That's interesting, because that's actually one of the biggest challenges I think we're going to face going forward. Right now, we're really growing. I think that it's not, there's probably 50 pilots going on different mobile devices. All of those right now are at the unclassified level. And even at the unclassified level, we're really struggling with, what's the right device. We're very used to the BlackBerry because we're very used to having that ability to configure and that kind of control. But going forward with commercial devices, that's really not going to be the case, first of all. Secondly, the turn of those devices is going to be much faster. And the challenge for us is, what are the kinds of applications that we actually want to put on? Because again, if you've got a unit that's forward deployed, you don't want them all to have different devices. So there's a certain amount where we're actually replacing devices that we would normally put out. If in fact you're not deployed and you're sort of on base, if you will, then there's the question of, can you use your own devices and what can you get to? And then there's the broader questions about just applications like GPS and being able to use the devices for that. So we're experimenting, I think, probably with every device that's out there. Lots of different good ideas for how to actually come in. But then we're also, simultaneously rolling out PKI authentication, both at our unclassified networks and our classified networks, which then adds the complication of needing embedded CAD card readers and making sure that we can do that. And it sounds like you've actually gotten to the point that we're kind of moving towards. I mean, we're trying to also get, while we're dealing with it at the device level, we're also trying to get a standard identity management approach across the organization, which seems like a fairly straightforward thing, but it's kind of like email systems, which haven't been the easiest thing for me to be able to do. But once we do that, then the question of relating the identity to the data is a challenge for us, just because we got so much. And it sounds like you've already started to actually work that and connect the access to the data. And I'm actually fascinated by the fact that you're able to do that kind of dynamically based on where the individual is.
Well, we do have consistent identity, so I do feel sorry for you if you don't have a consistent view of the identity of your
That's only one of the
base.
things, right?
That's one thing I feel sorry for you about. That sounds terrible. But yeah, we do have a consistent identity across the 97,000 Intel employees, and if you didn't have that, I agree with you, it will be very hard. But I will say we're not very good at our data classification, and so this is forcing that. We're saying if we want to make this application available onto your iPhone, we need to now classify that data, and only when you're at security level 4 will we push that data. So the data classification, which we've talked, it's one of those things in IT you talk about forever. Wouldn't it be nice if all of our data was classified? So this is going to force that, because we're going to want to associate a security level to the data classification, so it'll force us to get much better on the data classification side. It's funny, the other thing that we talk about consumerization, right? The buzzword consumerization, the fact that employees want to bring these devices in and their social networking solutions and all that jazz. I also think that we've got to turn the table around, and we've got to enterprise the consumers. And these worlds are blurring, right? The personal world and the professional world, or corporate and consumer, are blurring to such an extent, rather than us having to contend with all these low security devices. We need to, as a group, we need to push back and get greater security into the consumer devices. That will make our lives a whole lot easier. So we got to turn the tables on that, I think. But that's another long road to hoe.
Well, it is, and that's been an interesting challenge. We've had a lot of discussions, and that's why I'm interested kind of in the Intel cloud versus the cloud the rest of us have. But one of the interesting conversations, which I think is natural, it's not to say that the companies that produce the devices are bad by any stretch. But if you get into the commercial market, we DoD, who are used to being a customer with a fair amount of clout because of our numbers, are actually finding ourselves not to have a fair amount of clout, because the number of devices that we buy, if you look at the entire consumer market, actually is pretty small. So I don't know, I'm not sure how that's actually going to work. I don't know if you, as the supplier of chips, have more clout than we do.
Well, I don't know if we gang up together against them with your money, and but it is a good. It is a good point that it was 2000. So if you go back in time, the data supports exactly what you just said. If you go back in time to 1997, I know it's a long time ago, but 1997, commercial purchases of PCs were 2/3 of the market. So 1/3 of all PCs were being purchased by consumers, 2/3 were being purchased by you and me. In 2009 is when that toggled. So more PCs in 2009 were purchased by consumers than by us. And obviously since 2009, it has grown tremendously if you add in tablets and handhelds. So unfortunately, the market is being shaped by the consumer. But given consumerization, given this huge thrust, we'll rally together and see if we can have some influence.
Yeah, because I do think that there's a certain amount that we're going to be able to architect in, but there is a recognition, and I think it's growing, that this question of security is going beyond the point of just only your identity protection, but certainly as you look at it in the worlds either that we live in or you live in, we become sort of an entry point to be able to get at a much larger store of information and a much broader store of information, which I think is a challenge.
I've seen it in just my 3.5 years in IT, the security landscape, the threat landscape, it is daunting. And we continue to spend more and more to try to protect. Part of my job is to protect Intel's intellectual property. You obviously have a huge responsibility in the security, and it's getting harder and harder. So anything we can do together. I think they're telling us.
So are they?
They're giving us the hook. The fire's going to go out.
So thanks very much, Diane. It was fun. It was great fun.